Hi, my name's Nikki. This is The Interventionalists. And today I really want to talk about the concept of repetition compulsion, which is the idea that we will sort of unconsciously repeat the same traumatic event over and over again, or unconsciously put ourselves in similar situations where the traumatic event may reoccur as a way to sort of unconsciously process it. And I want to talk about it in relation to heterosexuality or comphet, compulsory heterosexuality, which I can never say that word, but comphet, and then also just general trauma, like any traumatic event you may experience. But the reason that I'm thinking about it in relation to comphet, like besides the fact that they're both compulsive, essentially experiences, is because I the other day made a video about homoerotic friendships, and in it I talk about how I experienced one when I was 17, and I think there's a lot of reasons that these are some of the most intense relationships you may ever experience, but it genuinely might have been the most impactful relationship I've ever had, because when I try and look back now, I think it might be easier to say, oh, it was this one, which was my abusive relationship when I was 22, versus the girl that I had a homoerotic friendship with when I was 17 in high school. But I know I know that she is essentially what led me to that relationship. And it's because I was looking for her and everyone that I met in a terrible way, in a sad way, and then also a terrible way, but essentially led me right to this woman who I got into a relationship with at 22, the first relationship I'd ever been in, and really the only I had ever been in. And it was incredibly abusive, and I talk about that on here a lot. But the thing that drew me into her, that caught my attention, was the fact that I could see this girl that I was arguably in love with in high school. I could see her in this woman when I was 22. And that's not a good thing. That's not a good thing at all. I referenced this in the video, in the homoerotic friendship video, but it ended horrifically. That friendship ended horrifically. And so just to recap a tiny bit, because it'll be relevant to the story, we had a very intense homoerotic friendship. I came out to her and I told her I was lesbian. She was the first and only person I'd ever come out to. And I told her I was lesbian. She told me that she was like, I think I'm bisexual. And then a week later, I won't get into it, it ended horrifically. I mean, just horrific. And we have not talked since. We have not spoken a word to each other since that day, despite having to go to school together for another year, and there being a lot of external collateral damage as a result of everything that happened between us. But it ended terribly, honestly, arguably the most impactful relationship I've ever experienced, because it traumatized me in a way that dictated how I went about all relationships for years afterwards. And the reason that I was thinking about repetition compulsion in relation to comphet is because for almost 5 years after that, until I was 21, after that happened, I was like, I'm not gonna be gay. This is not happening. This is I'm not gonna even entertain it. I can't, unless I was drunk and really sad, or having a really big freak out. I would try and avoid that acknowledgement of the fact that I was gay and that I'd come out before and I knew that I was gay at all costs. It was not an option anymore. I was going back in the closet because I had already grown up in a really traditional area and a really violently homophobic area. So I already didn't see being gay as something that was okay, or that I would ever live an okay life being. So having it kind of confirmed that it would be bad because I came out and then something really bad happened, just was no, you're going in the closet forever. It's fine. You're going to lock the door and it's never going to open. And so I was just I'm not doing this. And so for 5 years, until I was almost 22, I refused to be gay. I refused, as much as I could, at least. I would still have my moments, but I tried really hard. And I would try and go out with guys, and I would experience the same thing over and over again, which was the same, oh my God, I can't do this. This makes me so unhappy. I would cry about it, but I'd be no, you just have to find the right guy. Maybe if you try hard enough, eventually you'll get there. If you put yourself in enough situations, straight situations, eventually, you'll essentially, force yourself through it. You know what I mean? It's kind of I had the mindset of if you just throw someone in the water, eventually they'll learn to swim. It was kind of like just throw myself into every like straight situation I could, and maybe eventually like I'll learn to live within it and be okay. I can learn to like survive and not feel like I'm drowning, living in a world that I don't want, in a life that I don't want. I'll learn how to swim within it, you know? So I kept throwing myself in these situations that were really traumatic, and I kept doing it over and over again. And it's not traumatic as in like these people were necessarily being, these men were being necessarily horrible or horrific. I mean, I've had bad experiences with men for sure, but at the end of the day, it was still traumatic for me because I kept trying to put myself in situations that I was forcing myself to be in. It was a lot of like self-coercion because I didn't want to be who I was. And so I had to coerce myself in other situations and try and coerce myself into enjoying them. But the only way you're going to get yourself to be in situations that you don't even want to be in is through self-coercion. And yeah, maybe self-coercion is not the same as like being coerced by another person, but coercion is still incredibly uncomfortable and it feels violating, even if it's at your own hands, you know? And that impacted me because I kept repeating the same thing over and over again, which was trying to be straight, and I would end up in these same situations over and over again. And I even ended up going to a therapist for like 2 years until I was, gosh, I wish I remembered. I think it was like 18 to 20 or like 19 to 21 or for a couple years. And every week I would just go and talk to her and be like, I don't know what's wrong with me. Like, I need this to work. Like, I need to be able to make this work. And I would go on a date with like a guy, and then I'd come back and she'd be like, well, how did it go? And I'd repeat the same feeling over and over again, which was the same, like, oh my God, I don't want to do this. Like, I can't do this. I'm so uncomfortable. It makes me like feel sick to my stomach. I don't want this. I just like kept experiencing the same thing over and over again. And I had told her, I was like, well, I do like women, but it doesn't matter. Like, I don't want to talk about that. Like, I want to be with a man. And she just, I don't know. I feel like she should have probably not really encouraged it at that point, because it was, I don't know, in my opinion, like pretty clear that I was just trying to impose like self-induced conversion therapy at that point. But she continuously like encouraged me every week. And then eventually she just settled on telling me like, I don't really know what we can do to change this. You just have to find the right guy. And I was like, oh, well, I don't think that's going to happen. And after that, I stopped seeing her because it really bothered me that she said that. But I was always hoping that she was right. That's what I wanted. I thought maybe if I find the right guy. And so I was compulsively repeating the same behavior over and over again. Comphet. I was compulsively repeating comphet and the traumatic experiences that can come with trying to force yourself to be someone and do things that you don't want to do, that you don't want to be. And because of that, not only did I think I gave myself like intimacy issues, because now I was associating intimacy genuinely with like discomfort and like force, even though it's like self-force, because those were the intimate situations I kept putting myself into. I also was practicing like compulsive, repetitive avoidance. And that was avoiding ever experiencing any kind of like closeness with anyone ever again because of what happened when I was 17. So while I was also trying to force myself to feel close to people in a heterosexual way, I was also trying to avoid ever feeling close to anyone ever again because of how painful everything was when I was 17. And I'll put below like what I was reading, but I read a few different things, and in this one article it talks about these two different specific kinds of behaviors, and one is the repetitive behaviors, like essentially re-engaging in the same event over and over again, or like a repetitive extreme avoidance. And for the extreme avoidance, it says, extreme avoidance defenses will be instituted to circumvent ever experiencing such feelings again, which I experienced when I was also trying to force myself to be straight, partially because I was terrified of experiencing the pain that I felt at the hands of a woman, and something that I was already told was bad. So I was like, damn, like there's just, I don't know, at that point I just like felt like there was no hope for me to be gay and happy, because I was already told it wasn't okay to be gay, and then I just experienced a lot of pain the second I came out. It also says in this article about the extreme avoidance, it says, it is suggested here that the other half of the compulsion to repeat is the compulsive repetition of defenses and ways of being in the world that function to keep away a person's ultimate dread to ensure the individual's self-esteem and psychological safety. So it's essentially just like compulsively avoiding any little thing that could potentially put you back in the situation that you once were in that was so incredibly traumatic. And I guess it's like processing through avoidance, you know? Like you're trying to protect yourself by never putting yourself anywhere near anything that could ever even in the slightest way remind you of what happened before. And then on the other hand, there's experiencing just like the compulsive repetition where the processing is occurring through trying to like put yourself through the same situation over and over again, maybe to understand it differently. But one way that it's like pretty much understood, or that it's compulsive repetition is like understood is an attempt to do, is to master your trauma. So, for example, in this article, it says, although it has been theorized that the purpose of the repetition compulsion is to master trauma, mastery is rarely achieved. Which I think is kind of the point, right? Like, no matter how many times you repeat something or you go through a similar situation, it will never fix what has already happened. It'll never change what has already happened. And all you're doing at that point is adding to the stack of pain that you're now creating by repeating a traumatic thing over and over again. And the problem with that is then you continue to traumatize yourself and re-victimize yourself. And now not only do you have to deal with the pain that you now carry in addition to like the pain you already were carrying, but there's a lot of like self-blame and confusion and like I think anger you can experience towards yourself because you know that you are a common denominator in the situation. Like in this article, there's a piece that says, it has also been observed that survivors of childhood trauma often reenact and compulsively repeat the trauma in their present lives, which can result in re-victimization. And so like you are being objectively harmed, right? If you're being re-victimized, you're being objectively harmed. And whether or not it's because you're like engaging in the same behaviors, like maybe yes, you are compulsively repeating behaviors that led to that situation. But at the end of the day, like you can't blame yourself for abuse or trauma that another person is putting you through. You can like end up in a situation over and over again. It can be like a similar situation, but to expect trauma and abuse or to ever blame yourself for somebody else's decision to act in such an inhumane or horrific way is never your fault. It's never going to be your blame to carry. But when you're in that situation or you've experienced it again and you know that like, oh my God, like I've done this before. I know there's signs. I know that I've gone out with people, for example, that behave in a similar way. Like I know how it's going to end. I keep doing this. Like how can you not blame yourself? And it's just so frustrating to not know how to stop being the common denominator. And like, yes, you're the common denominator in every relationship because you're a part of it, I guess. But you don't know how to like stop it from happening and then how to stop hating yourself because it keeps happening. And the reason why I was thinking about comphet in particular is because the concept of mastering your trauma, right? Like for me, a lot of the compulsive behaviors I experienced when I was like experiencing comphet were in efforts to master heterosexuality, to like master being straight. I've literally said that. I've said that to a therapist before that I like is something I think I can like master. I can do it. It's a skill that I can develop if I try hard enough, if I work hard enough at this. There's something wrong with me that like I should be able to fix or I should be able to develop like a certain kind of muscle in my brain. I don't know. That like if I do this enough, I can master it, right? And like being so frustrated then that I keep ending up in the same situation and keep hurting because I keep hurting myself in the same situation and then blaming myself because I couldn't change the situation. I couldn't make it different. I couldn't make myself straight. The same way that like ending up in a relationship that reminded me of one and with a woman that literally reminded me of the one that once like really traumatized me, that wasn't going to change. Like I only got angry at myself for repeating something that has already happened and then not being able to change what has happened and then being angry at myself because I couldn't change it, but being angry at myself because I repeated it. And I know that there were similarities. And if there's similarities, why the hell am I repeating it? But I don't know. There's something about knowing and then another thing about doing. And like at the end of the day, we're all only human, and that cognitive dissonance is so disorienting and so difficult to actually experience and try and mitigate when it's happening. When you do know that like what is objectively happening right now is potentially going to put you in like a bad situation again, or it's not going to pan out, like me trying to be straight, but you keep doing it anyways because there's something inside of you that just like has to, for whatever reason. And I think even if it's the extreme avoidance, like that side of it, wanting to connect with people or wanting to care about people, but something inside you is like, I can't. I know that there are people out there that are safe or good people, but I can't. I literally cannot get myself to connect with others. There's all these different ways that like we might know something and yet we can't get ourselves to act differently. And it is so exhausting to know that in that sense, you are the common denominator, is like not figuring out how you can change and knowing that who you are right now or what you're doing, if not changed, is going to continue to really hurt you. But again, like if you're in situations where somebody is really hurting you, that is not your blame to take, ever. That is not a result of your actions. Nothing you do will ever justify somebody being abusive or being objectively harmful or terrible or being objectively abusive. There's nothing you are doing that's instigating that ever. Like, yes, like we can unpack what leads us to maybe being drawn to relationships or people who end up being dangerous, but your behavior is never leading to that abuse ever, or justifying that it's happening, or ever like a reasoning. I just want to like clarify that. And in this one article I was reading, it's really interesting because I think about that. Like, I know that this is bad and I can see it, yet I keep doing it and I don't know why. And in this one article, there's a line that like really stuck out to me, and it said, trauma survivors can become overwhelmed by error and fear when a threatening situation is encountered. This can prevent them from taking appropriate action, which can lead to reenactment and re-victimization, which makes so much sense to me because not only I think can we sometimes, if you've experienced trauma in the past and now you're encountering, whether or not it's because maybe you're repeating some behaviors, a situation that reminds you of the past, you're still a trauma, you still like are a trauma survivor who now like is going to experience the side effects of having experienced trauma, which means when you're faced with a situation that reminds you of that, it's going to affect you. Like, it's going to cause some kind of response in your body. Maybe it depends on how healed you are, how much you like process this past situation, but I think it's very seldom not like going to be something that never affects you if you face it again. And so, yes, maybe you're repeating some behaviors, but by the time you get to the position where like the traumatic sequence of events may reoccur, the tiniest semblance of a beginning is now causing you to like freeze. Because that is like a trauma response, like freeze or like fawning, where you just kind of, your brain just kind of shuts off and you kind of just like submit to the situation. It's called the fawn response. Actually, let me get like the exact definition of that fawn response. The fawn response is a trauma-related coping mechanism where someone tries to avoid conflict by pleasing others. So essentially, yeah, like you people please, you like your brain shuts off, you just do whatever the other person wants. But essentially, by the time you get any like semblance of a sign that this is similar to what you've experienced in the past, something traumatic, it changes the way that you interact with the situation. And unfortunately, it might cause you to sort of freeze and not know how to act anymore in a way that could protect yourself, which is kind of weird, right? Like self-preservation, we think, okay, run, but there's a reason that it's like, I don't know, there's fight and flight, but there's also freeze. And yes, it makes sense when you experience danger to run, maybe avoid, get as far away as you can. But at other times, when you've experienced trauma where there was no getting away and the only option was to freeze and try and protect yourself while freezing, it can be through trying to appease the person or trying to just be as little confrontation as possible to avoid becoming a bigger target to the person in front of you. There's all these different reasons that now you might develop, one, a trauma response in general, a freezing, but also not knowing how to act in a way to get out of it, because now you're experiencing something that you've experienced before. And if you haven't processed it, you might not even know the actions you would need to take to really recognize it and leave the situation, or maybe do so in like a safe manner. But at the end of the day, like, it's just a really shitty situation to be in, to experience like this sort of like repetition compulsion just because you've already experienced something traumatic and you're trying to like heal from it, or you're trying to master something, even maybe consciously, like me with heterosexuality, and ending up in these situations. And then once you're in these situations, because you have been affected by them like significantly in the past, they're affecting you again in a way that's going to make it difficult to just disengage and be like, okay, I know what's happening, I need to leave, like this is going to end badly. Like that kind of pain and that kind of re-traumatization or reminder of your trauma is going to pull you in a different way than you might even anticipate. And I was wondering, like, because then I'm thinking about, right, my like homoerotic friendship, and I know that so much of what led me into the abusive relationship I got into when I was 22 was a result of ending up in like being in front of a person again that reminded me of that person that had really hurt me. Not really knowing, like, I think it just suddenly I just sort of shut off. Like it felt like my brain would kind of like just like shut off. And I remember telling her, like, this girl I was then in a relationship with, I was like, you remind me so much of this girl I was best friends with at 17. And she asked me if that was a good thing. And I said, I don't know, because it wasn't. But at the same time, it was like the thing I had been looking for over and over again. Because I looked for her in everyone that I met, in positive ways and negative ways. Like she was always in the back of my mind when I met someone after what had happened, friends or like people I was going on dates with. And I knew objectively she is not a person I should ever have a relationship with in any capacity ever again. Like objectively, because of what happened, I should not be with someone who reminds me of her. That is not a good thing. That is not a familiarity I should lean into, right? Like, and Yet when I found someone who gave me that sense of familiarity, despite knowing how this ended before and knowing the traits that they shared, I was like, no, but I think it can just be the good parts. Maybe like it can be like you'll just have the good parts of her, is like what I would tell myself in my head. And maybe I can have back the parts of that relationship that meant a lot to me and that were good and that were just really intense. And like, I don't know, it was a really weird mindfuck to like miss this person from when I was 17 while also being incredibly traumatized by this person, and to miss what I thought the relationship was, and then find someone who had similar traits, but thinking to myself, well, maybe I can have back what I miss and without the same outcome or the same pain. But the traits that they shared were the traits that caused the relationship when I was 17 to end horrifically. And one of those is being like a very aggressive person, like that bulldozes over others, but a very aggressive person. And I don't know. Once I was in that situation, I saw that similarity. Not only did I now like couldn't get myself to like think clearly enough to leave, like it suddenly like something in me just like shut off. I can't even explain it. But I also was hoping that things would be different and I would get back something that I also really missed and felt a lot of confusion and guilt over, because the way that it ended was so traumatizing. Like, I think even if you know, like objectively, maybe something isn't your fault, it's still difficult to live with knowing that something happened to you that you wish didn't, and thinking of all of the ways in which maybe it could have been different, or it could have changed, or you could have acted differently to make the situation different, and how different your life would be if you just found a way to make sure something that should have never happened. And I think that's kind of like what my brain was trying to do, was like, I wish what had happened never happened. And I wish that I could have just kept like a friend and not lose that relationship that was like so important to me. Or all these different like scenarios in my head. And I thought, here is someone who was just like that. And maybe things will be different this time, you know? And it wasn't. It was actually significantly worse. But there was a lot of pain and guilt and shame then that I felt, because I saw that similarity really early on in the beginning. And I knew that they were similar, and I thought maybe I could change like sort of the outcome and I could have back the things that I did miss, but things would be different, and they weren't. So surprise, surprise, when this was also a terrible, horrific relationship, I just felt like an idiot, and I felt stupid and like it was my fault. And like I was the one to blame for somebody else hurting me, because if I'm putting myself in that situation, then like, of course, what can I expect? But again, there is never, you don't go into something and be like, oh, what can I expect? Like, of course they were going to abuse me. No, that's never an expectation you should ever have. And putting that expectation on yourself in any capacity is not fair. But that's just how I felt. And so then it ended, and I'm like, I am the common denominator. Like, I just put myself in a situation that also ended terribly, and had a lot of similarities, and I'd already been through it before. So the fact that I didn't learn, like, this must be my fault, because I should have been different this time. It's very much like quite literally personifying the idea that like, what if I did something different? You know, when something happens to you and it's not your fault, you think, but what if I did something differently? It's like going through the motions of that, finding a situation where you can, but finding out that it doesn't matter if you do something differently. Like, if you're putting yourself in a traumatic situation with a dangerous person, like it's not going to stop or change the fact that this is a dangerous person that is reminding you already of a dangerous person, because it's not your fault or your responsibility to prevent them or stop them from being dangerous or to expect them to be dangerous, right? We have to protect ourselves, but still, like, no matter what you do in that new situation, if somebody is showing signs of being a dangerous person like they once were, or showing signs of someone that once hurt you, it's unlikely that you're going to find a way to change that person in front of you, to change the narrative, you know? But it still feels like all your fault when you fail to do that, when you when you end up back in a similar situation and the same thing happens again and you're getting hurt again in a similar way. How do you not just like leave feeling like you're an idiot and it's your fault? And that's how I felt. And I felt like I didn't even want to talk about it that much with others, for a lot of reasons after I got out of the abusive relationship when I was 22, for so many reasons. But part of it was because I felt so stupid, because I've already gone through something bad before and with a person who was similar to this. So like, how dumb am I going to look to other people to now have gone through it again, or something similar? It wasn't the same thing, but just like something similar. And so it just like kind of made me feel more ashamed about what had happened and then like revert into myself. And so right after I like got out of that abusive relationship at 22, I went into like a state of pretty much like extreme avoidance. But when I was 17 and after things happened in that homoerotic friendship, I went into a state of extreme avoidance for 5 years until I was almost 22. I did not actually let myself get close to anybody, not even friends. I really struggled. In that time, when I would talk to my therapist, I couldn't even get myself to open up to be close to friends because I would compare everyone to her. And at the same time that I was comparing everyone to her and looking for her and everyone, I was scared of people and friends now because of her and what had happened with her. And so I couldn't get close to friends. I couldn't like develop new connections. I was trying to force myself to be straight. So I was always like emotionally unavailable. But then at the same time, like I was like compulsively avoiding any form of connection or intimacy that would even allow for potential emotional availability. And so I went 5 years without feeling like I could even get close to anyone. Like literally I was working on it for 5 years. And then eventually I hit like 21. I came out of the closet. I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like I have repeated the same thing over and over again. I have tried to be straight over and over again, and I'm crying myself to sleep every night because it's not working. And I can't change this. Like, I'm not going to be able to change this. I've repeated it so many times that now I have intimacy issues that I never even had before. And intimacy scares me in a different way because it feels like force now, or like something I have to force myself to get through in any capacity. At this point, how many more times do I have to prove to myself over and over again that like, this isn't what I want, that this is not who I am, that this is never going to be who I am, that this is never going to make me happy? How many times do I have to prove to myself that I actually am gay? You know? And I feel like we can get stuck in that loop, like as if you're queer, if you're sapphic, if you're lesbian, like almost feeling like you need to continuously prove that you are gay, whether that's through like putting yourself in situations that remind you that you're repulsed by like maybe being intimate with the other sex or whatever, or maybe like going kind of crazy once you do come out as a way to try and like feel grounded or like prove to yourself, no, I actually am gay, so I'm gonna engage in every single gay behavior possible as a way to like almost feel like I'm proving it to myself, even though you don't have to prove anything to yourself, you just are. But there's this weird experience, like phenomenon of feeling like, I don't know, you need to make sure you are this thing. You need to prove it to yourself and then to others. And I think that I experienced that with comphet, trying to eventually at some point prove to myself over and over again that this isn't going to change. And after proving it to myself so many times, I just had to accept the fact that it wasn't going to change. I had too much proof at that point. And so I came out. I texted, I'm going to make a video this week about that, like the moment I realized I was gay. But I came out to my friend, and then I hit like almost 22. And at that point, I started kind of going out with women. And then I, not long after, when I was 22, met the woman that reminded me of my friend when I was in high school. And she was the first person I felt really that attachment to, that like real closeness, that closeness, that like genuine connection. And I sort of lit up at it because I had been looking for that for so long, someone that just reminded me of her. And I didn't know why. Because it wasn't going to, she also hurt me horrifically. And I tried to avoid ever experiencing that pain again for 5 years. I tried to not come out of the closet for 5 years to avoid that pain. And then I dated for a little bit, and then I met her and she reminded me of her. And then suddenly I was like all in. Like I was like, oh my God, I can't. My brain shut off. And now I was like hitting that point of like repetitive compulsion. And I just like couldn't stop. I was just like, oh my God, I know that they remind me of each other. I know why this is objectively bad. And now I can't stop. I'm literally just like spiraling into this. I can't stop myself from going all in. And I didn't know why. And then obviously it ended up being a really abusive relationship. It was not long before that was like not a choice. But I couldn't stop myself. And it was so frustrating because I had stopped myself for 5 years from even allowing myself to get close to people or feeling like I was even able to get close to people. I had prevented myself from dating women at all. I had like worked so hard to not experience that pain again, which was like trying to avoid being gay and then trying to avoid being close to people. And then I met someone who reminded me of her, and it was like that compulsive repetition that I couldn't stop. And it was so frustrating. Oh my God, was it frustrating? And then I just felt stupid when things obviously started to genuinely repeat the traumatic behaviors, and then this time just significantly worse. And knowing that I saw signs, and instead of running from them, I almost used them as like a guide to go forward and change and rewrite the past in a way that like can bring with me the past in a way that like or to bring with me the things I never wanted to lose, to find them again before things were like ended horrifically. and just stop them from ending this time horrifically. Like, I could rewrite it and keep things as they once were, but I can't. What once was already gone. And what once was bad. There was no changing that. That was all that it was, because that's how it ended. And yet I found myself repeating it. But there's also something to be said for trying to master something that was never meant to be mastered in the first place. Like, you were never supposed to have to master being harmed by somebody else, or going through something traumatic, or trying to master something that you don't have to be an okay and good person, like trying to master heterosexuality, like to be the right thing, or trying to master abuse or trauma. These are things that like you were never meant to master. Like, you're just supposed to be as a person, and exist without pain, including feeling like you need to endure pain in order to become the right thing, like straight. Like, you need to now endure pain to somehow like rewrite the narrative that originally led to that pain. Like, you were never meant to have to rewrite narratives or master trauma. You were never meant to master these things. They were never meant to be burdens put on you to have to try and fix later down the line, I guess that's like it. I do think my camera's probably low on battery, like might die, so I guess I should end this. But if anyone else has experienced this, or is experiencing this, like currently in a cycle where you can't seem to stop repeating something that is hurting you, or ending up in situations that are hurting you in a way that you were once hurt before, and maybe the thing that began the cycle, maybe the person, maybe the part of you that's contributing to the cycle. Like for me, I didn't want to be gay, because I didn't want to be hurt again, and also because I don't know, I was experiencing like internalized homophobia. But if you're experiencing that, I hope you know that it's whatever pain somebody has imposed on you or has caused you, that's not your fault. That is not your burden. That is not your blame to be placed. And if you are struggling and going through things that are currently hurting you, I don't know. I'm just want to like remind you that no matter like how long a cycle may repeat, it won't repeat forever, and you won't be stuck in that loop forever. I really don't believe that. And however you heal, in whatever way is your way, you will. And that this particular thing, whatever it is that is haunting you over and over again, won't haunt you forever. Maybe like with time, you'll be haunted by new things, which is not even a great thought, but sometimes it's better than believing that you'll be haunted by the same thing forever. And yeah, I think it just maybe the starting point is trying to figure out what it is that began the cycle. Maybe it's a person, maybe it's a thing, but maybe that's like the first step. But sometimes you have that step and still things seem impossible to change. But yeah, I just hope you know that it won't last forever. I know that it doesn't help if you are experiencing that, but it really won't. Life is too semi-permanent. Like change is inevitable and promised, and you will experience so much in life that you'll have no choice but to move forward and now think and focus on other things, because no matter how stuck in the past you may be, or how much you're bringing the past with you into the present, it doesn't change the fact that like the present will eventually rip you into it, and like you will not be able to stay in the past forever, and in this case, or repeat the past forever. And in this case, that I think is a good thing to know. So yeah, well, I guess I'll just end that and on there. And if you have any thoughts on this, or want to share something that you've experienced with, or that maybe that you're struggling with related to this, I have a website where you can send submissions about this or literally anything else. I would love to hear it. Any kind of experience, you can send it there, whether just to me, just have someone read it, or I also upload them on my website. If you want, you can also just send it. But if you would like it uploaded and maybe for other people to see, anonymously or not, I'm happy to do that. There's some really great pieces of writing that people have recently submitted that are uploaded. If you want to watch them or read them, they're going to be linked down below, but they're really great. I would recommend it. And I think so many of those pieces speak to what I think so many queer people go through. So I'd really recommend it. There's some really wonderful pieces on there. And if you want yours added, I would be honored. Or if you just want to talk about it, I'd be honored to be the one to read it. And yeah, I make videos on TikTok and Instagram if you want to watch those. And I guess that's it. Yeah, I'll be making another video on Sunday and another video on Thursday. So I'll actually swap those, Thursday and Sunday. So that's just a heads up. And I'll be talking about PTSD on Thursday, PTSD and insanity. So, okay, I guess I'll end it here before I just like compulsively repeat the same things over and over again. Okay, yeah. Thank you for watching. Bye.